Swansea. 1-0 Blackburn.
There we go.
Swansea makes it 2-0. Gallagher plays it in. It's 3-0. Ball in. Could be in. It's 4.
4-0. Oh,
Swansea pulls it across, and
it is
that's
5.
number 5.
The loss to Blackburn seemed inexplicable given the quality of performance just 3 days earlier against Cardiff. So what is the problem? The players are talented enough. Sure, they lack experience sometimes, and we have some areas to improve upon. Defensive corners, free kicks, and some decision-making. But on the whole, this is a capable bunch of players. So what is going on? Well, I believe the current problem lies with Mike Dodds. He's good at some things, like in-game management and substitutions. But there's one thing he cannot seem to learn. He does not seem to analyse our coming opponents well enough, or at least he doesn't let it influence his choices enough. Every game he sets up his teams in order to fix things that went wrong in the previous game, instead of thinking about how to deal with the current opponents in front of him this week. Let me show you what I mean. The first game in charge in his third stint as manager was against Swansea, a side who came into the game with 1 win in 7. On the face of it, no great shakes. But a simple examination of that form would have shown you that they had played the top 4 in those 7 fixtures. So perhaps that run isn't wholly representative of a terrible side. On top of which, they had added a highly exciting and pacey winger, Ronaldo from Brazil, who all their fans were raving about. So what does Mike Dodds do? Hubris gets the better of him, and inflated with pride at his last result, the outstanding defeat of Leeds at home in December, he decides to replay that game and opts for 3 at the back like he did that day, only he's going to push on a little more against a weaker Swansea side. And the result was a disaster. It failed to take account of the threat that Swansea posed, and they tore us apart with balls in behind and down the flanks, Ronaldo getting a brace. To Dodds' credit, he recognised this with half an hour in, but the game was gone by then.
Ronaldo!
Next up was a Norwich team that sat 17th for goals conceded, 18th for shots conceded, and 19th for field tilt. Field tilt means the most of the division spend more time in the opponent's final third than they do, because they're 19th in the division for it. They do have 2 significant threats, though. They use a gegenpress when they lose the ball in the final third, the few times they're up there. And this is highly productive for them with players like Josh Sargent up front and Gabriel Sara, who can instantly make use of re-won ball high up the park. And they also favour crosses to Sargent and Barnes, and they sit 4th in the division for most successful crosses. All of this signified a generally ponderous team, who are only a threat in pressing our defence when they lose the ball high up, or in crossing from the flanks in open play. David Wagner absolutely insists that they must play the ball out from the back on all occasions unless absolutely forced not to. This should have dictated numbers forward in attack, confident that Norwich are simply not allowed to punt the ball away quickly or play it fast from the back. We simply had to play out of defence quickly, leave wingers up inside our half and play over the high press when it came, so that these players could get out as quickly as possible. We also needed to cover off the wings defensively to stop their crosses, which they're very good at. So what did Dodds do? He played 4 at the back and sat tight in a mid-block in the middle of the park, rarely advancing in numbers and forcing Norwich to play down the wings, where they are amongst the best in the league at delivering crosses. We played into their strengths instead of into ours. Dodds was trying to play a team that would have performed better against Swansea. The result was a largely dull game where we didn't threaten a Norwich fragile defence, and we offered them unchallenged crosses from the wings, where naturally they profited. And that's how we lose the game.
Second, third chance, fourth chance goes in. Get a few bites at it. But in the end,
On to Leicester, and he was better, but Dodds played 5-4-1 with no wingers, and yet Hamir up front. I mean, what was the point? Yes, Leicester lack height and are one of the worst in the divisions for winning aerials, so yes, play Hamir. But to do so and select no wingers is not only pointless, it completely misses the weakness of the team you're playing against. And they don't have many weaknesses, Leicester, do they? So I'm not entirely convinced by this selection and what it was about. it certainly didn't present us with what could be one of our best chances of getting a goal. Again, Dodds seemingly not concentrating enough on the present challenge. Southampton up next, and we know how to play against them. Mowbray showed us earlier in the season. Against a super intensely pressing side, you sit back. You keep your wingers, at least one of them, up by the halfway line. You let the opposition come on to you, and you play it over the top of the press to the wingers to spring out. And to be fair, Dodds tried to do this, and it nearly worked. But he had a master plan provided him by Mowbray earlier in the season, so I'm not sure how much we can credit him with that.
Job might though. Does he fancy one? Job! It's calling! What a goal! Job has scored!
Well, he got himself in a mess in the first half and gifted Southampton the goal.
On to QPR. The least said about this game, the better. QPR are actually not that bad defensively, but they offer almost nothing going forward except the high ball. So simply defend on the wing and from deep, and they are not going to score. Then it's simply about getting forward ourselves, and in this game, to register not a single shot on target against a less than average championship side is an abject performance. Was he too cautious? Certainly. But why? Perhaps having lost 4 in a row, he wanted to make sure we didn't lose this one. Once again, Mike, playing the last game, not the one in front of you. Against Cardiff, this paid dividends looking backwards. It was clear against QPR that line breaks, forward runs and aggressive front foot football were what was needed. So Dodds employed this. It just so happened that was also what was required against Cardiff. Excuse me if I'm not convinced by this preparation. I think a bit of luck came into this one.
Again here, Sheesh puts it across. Job!
There we go.
It's to the top of the net! It's 2-0 to Sunderland!
Yes, and there he is, that man.
Which brings us to Monday and home to Blackburn, where most of us expected a win. And, in truth, we were very capable of getting one. But instead, we endured a blue Monday, and that was entirely of Dodds' own creation, and in the same fashion as the previous ones. Blackburn sit 19th in the table without a win in 10 games, and yes, Danny Collins, they have shipped 65 goals this season. But when you utter that statistic, what you're failing to recognise there is what has happened recently at Blackburn. In mid-February, John Eustace took over from John Thomason, and what Eustace has built is not the same team that racked up those stats and conceded those goals. In the 10 games without a win, Blackburn have actually shipped fewer goals than Sunderland. In fact, if you compare Blackburn since Eustace took over to Blackburn before he was there, under John Thomason, what you find is that under Eustace you have a team that has seen a 22% decline in field tilt. So, this is a team that sits lower and more passive and is more defensively minded than they were under Thomason. Clearly, this will leave them less vulnerable at the back to gung-ho attacking. And indeed, Blackburn concede nearly 25% fewer shots on goal than they used to. No surprise, then, that to make up for this more defensive play, they played 20% more long balls each game. But the one thing that has not changed since Eustace took over is Blackburn's ferocious press, which has actually increased under Eustace. Blackburn actually sit top of the gegenpress intensity charts. No team in the Championship tries more intensely or ferociously to win the ball back quickly than Blackburn do. And a cursory glance at any statistics site would have told you this. And we saw it today, chomping at the feet of Ekwa and Neil, any isolated man, to get the ball back as quickly as possible. And it paid them grand dividends. So why then was Ekwa pushed high in the midfield again? And why was the last man often trying to thread difficult balls through? Because it worked against Cardiff. But they were more passive. Today, Blackburn pounced on us, and we were left exposed as the last man faltered on the ball or was rushed into a poor pass from the press. This was Blackburn's only game plan. But when they started to rob us and counter, we looked shell-shocked and surprised. Clearly the lads were neither prepared nor wary of the most intense press in the league. Why? This defeat was the result of Dodds' decisions, and a lesson he continues to fail to learn. What should he have done against Blackburn, against such a highly intensely pressing team? Well, let's look at who is second in the division behind them for pressing intensity, Southampton, and who is third, Leeds United. And we know how to play against those teams because we beat those teams, both doing that intense press. Now, if I can acquire these simple sat in the house on my own, then why can't Dodds? Well, he can, but he simply doesn't prepare his team for playing the next game. And this is the lesson he repeatedly fails to learn. He tries to play a better game against the team he played last week instead of examining the one in front of him this week. Sure, you have to try to improve on performances that have gone, and examining those performances are part and parcel of what you've got to do to make improvements. But can we please prepare for the team that is coming to us next as the priority? Because if you do that, it will direct you about which things to focus on and which things to prioritise to improve upon, rather than sending out a team to win last week's game and not this week's. Look, I know this is a pretty strong opinion, but there have to be some answers as to why our performances are so off. We lose games that we are more than capable of winning, and we seem ill-prepared and focused on occasions. The performances are up and down, and it's hard to pinpoint why. This is what I think ties it all together. I'm happy to be wrong, but I also think it's entirely justified to give Dodds pelters off the back of our worst home defeat since 1981, when we lost 5-1 to Man United, and we were hardly facing a team of that calibre. However, in his defence, he's been handed a mess to manage without support. Managers have assistants and coaches. He is the assistant, and one with little frontline experience, really. I actually appreciate that he's always there for us to step in when needed. Dodds is a good guy who always does what is needed without complaint. And it can't be easy. He's having to do everything on his own. So let's temper what I think is a problem with some understanding of the difficult task he's got. And remember, there's a lot of merit to the man as well. I want him to stay. He's clearly well liked by the players. He does help managers with active solutions in-game. And I generally think his subs are well chosen. But is he our next manager? No, not yet. Let's hope for a more competent performance against the Robins this weekend. I'd like to say it's the hope I can't stand, but it's more a question of endurance these days.